we have to keep on monitoring and assessing, especially in the age of COVID. We realize that this uncharted territory, you have to make sure that you know where you are, where you stand, so you can recalibrate or you can upgrade programs as they come along. Let me just start off that my presentation is all about education and education governance and local government units. As you all know, as I was introduced, I am the current city mayor of the city of Valenzuela, one of the 17 component cities of Metro Manila. The next slide will show you what I want to start with. Well, let me just start with this bold statement. Unfortunately, this is not a sweeping statement, but rather this is a statement of fact. In the Philippine education setting, the student is actually set up to fail. I know it's quite drastic for me to say that, but let me substantiate it in the following slides. Next slide. Now, I said those things because I realized that after 8 years of serving as local chief executive Valenzuela, I realized that all the characters that are surrounding the child in this setting, actually, rather than working towards the success of a child, is actually working towards the hindrance of a child learning. We get, first of all, the parents. Parents are supposed to be the early or the first point of contact of a child in learning. They're supposed to be the first teachers at home. But unfortunately, learning in the Philippines doesn't happen at home because we have disengaged parents. I realized early on that their concept of being a parent is watching TV together with their children rather than opening a book and actually learning how to read with your child. We have local school boards set up in our cities and municipalities. But these local school boards are not representative, they're not consultative, and more so, because the mayor has the strongest voice, it's so mayor-centric. Only his voice gets heard and it's drowned out. And we all know, sometimes when the mayor starts talking, it becomes more of about him rather than what the child wants. Also, our local school boards tend to be myopic or in its vision of trying to solve the problems of a child. Their solutions are always infrastructure heavy. Now, let me just put you in the paradigm of my setting. It's in the infrastructure heavy because everybody thinks that in order for the child to succeed, you need more classrooms. They forget to think that most of the problems of a child is skin deep. It's inside, it's emotional, it's mental. It's not just about gravel and sand solutions. Also, in our education setting, every concern is not treated as a holistic problem, but rather as a piecemeal problem that requires a piecemeal solution rather than a holistic or systemic approach. Case in point, feeding and illiteracy. These are two things that studies have shown to be correlated to each other. But in the Philippines, we try to treat them, or in most schools in the Philippines, we try to address in-school hunger and illiteracy as two separate things. So sadly, there can be a holistic systemic approach, but it's not that way. Also, I would like to call it the dual personality of the education setting in the Philippines. It's neither centralized nor decentralized. It's centralized in the sense that it's too rigid, but whenever you want to decentralize it, they'll invoke centralization. But when you want to invoke centralization, they invoke decentralization. Meaning when there are no clear-cut responsibilities, when you don't know if it's the role of the national government or the local government units, things fall into the cracks. That's the sad part. We haven't really defined what our education setup in the Philippines is. Also, this is a sweeping statement. I know a lot of you will say it's unfair, but I have first-hand experience on this. Our local education, our national education ministry sometimes has this culture of denial, meaning from top to bottom, everybody just tells you, from the teachers all the way to the superintendents, they always tell you, look, Mayor, there's no problem, everything's nice, everything's good. But mayors are not supposed to ask these things. So whenever the main agency tasked to help education is in denial, then obviously you won't find solutions to the problem. So what did Valenzuela City do? In a nutshell, Valenzuela City set out, next slide, to challenge the status quo of the education setup. We realized that local governments can actually dismantle the status quo with its own tools in its arsenal. In our case in Valenzuela City, we ventured into places where traditionally mayors or the city wasn't supposed to venture into. I would get answers like, Mayor, you're not supposed to do that. Mayor, that's not your job. Mayor, you can't do that. But we just realized you have to use your political capital or your political will to dismantle the mindset, the status quo, and deconstruct education from the ground up. It won't be 100% reconstruction, but at least you'll start somewhere. Next slide will show you our program. It's actually our own program. It's called Education 360 Investment Program. It's a program that is holistic, that treats everything as a systemic issue, and it puts the child in the middle. That's why it's 360. We would envision it to be a circle with a child in the middle. Now, just briefly, I won't bore you with the details. It's a holistic approach because it starts talking about building facilities. But we ventured further into nanay teacher. What is a nanay teacher? Nanay teacher is, nanay in our language is mother. So it's mother teacher. It's empowering our parents to go beyond the vision of what a PTA or a parent teacher conference is, but rather to become engaged in the learning life of your children. Our program also incorporates teaching camps, even if it's not devolved, wherein we bring our teachers to camps to re-strategize them with the most modern teaching strategies. We also help in curriculum development. We launched our own anti-illiteracy program. We started working on our own feeding program. And then we also started incentivizing these programs and brought in inclusive learning as well as a well-rounded program for sports. So moving forward, next slide. What I learned is you have to learn to defy gravity by challenging the status quo. It's pretty much just saying LGUs have to take, or city governments must take the driver's seat in crafting the program of education. You can't just say that it's the division office or the DepEd's problem. It's everybody's problem. I'll give you one anecdote. Early on in my term, we wanted to do a reading camp because we found out that a lot of our kids in the right age or right grade level couldn't read. They were frustrated non-readers, or they just didn't know how to read at the third grade or the sixth grade. So instead of just fighting them and trying to touch the curriculum because it's not devolved, we created our summer reading camp. Of course, there was a pushback against it because the DepEd people or the department people were saying, there's no problem, Mayor. You don't have to do this. But we just kept on harping and harping that there is a problem and we have to do that. Another takeaway we learned is to listen and to keep on listening, because the right answers normally come from the stakeholders. You have to start thinking outside the box and coming up with innovative programs to work around the system. And we also realize that you have to recalibrate. Making mistakes actually breeds upgrades in governance programs. The next slide will tell you about our challenges, that when you knew it, COVID happened and it made matters worse. What we learned there was COVID turned the governance issues upside down, including education. Suddenly, all the playbook things that we know, all the tools that we know, out of the window. So moving forward, we created our own setup. We created our Valenzuela Live, which is our own distance learning platform, where we basically created the streaming school. We were streaming standardized content for all our students to watch. These contents are tailored fit to pattern after what their modules are in front of them. The sad part with the national setup is what they're watching on the national TV doesn't match what's created locally in the modules or the learning kits. So here, they're synchronized and they're streaming standardized content for the entire division. So we created our own studios that's tailor-fitting materials for our own learners. So the next couple of slides will sum up what I've said. Again, in our template for learning to challenge the status quo, the mayors must come up with a conscious effort to take the driver's seat. You cannot keep on saying, hey, it's not my responsibility, it's not devolved, so I'll let the national government deal with it. You have to start sitting down and telling the division office that this is a co-partnership, this is a co-pilot issue, wherein the national government and the local government must come up with creative, innovative solutions to solve the problems, especially brought about by COVID, that turned the entire education system upside down. Next slide. Again, I've said this also. Mayors must take an active role in dealing with education because you have the political capital. People recognize you. You're a face that they're comfortable with. You're a face that they can relate to. You're a face that they trust. And we have to use that trust level to be able to come up with materials or programs that will suit our local learners. But in order to do that, you have to engage the entire community. I'm not a educator, but we managed to come up with our own education program because we engage everybody in the sector, all the end users, especially now in the times of COVID where the challenges are more pronounced. You need more players, you need the business sector, you need everybody in the picture. Last slide, we'll talk about one more takeaway that I learned. We have to keep on monitoring and assessing, especially in the age of COVID. Distance learning is new for the Philippines. Distance learning is new for Valenzuela. But we realize that this uncharted territory, you have to keep on testing yourself. You have to make sure that you know where you are, where you stand, so you can recalibrate or discontinue programs, or you can upgrade programs as they come along. Thank you for sharing, giving me this time to share the Valenzuela story. Thank you.